Silence did not arrive suddenly in Erika Kirk's life. It crept in slowly, disguised as composure, discipline, survival. By the time the questions grew loud enough to demand answers, the damage had already settled deep into memory, into identity, into the private spaces fame could never reach. From the outside, her life appeared orderly, even admirable, a woman who endured, adapted, moved forward without complaint. But beneath that controlled surface, something essential had been deferred for decades, waiting for the moment it could no longer be ignored. This is not the story of a single scandal or a dramatic fall caught by cameras. It is the story of accumulation, of small silences becoming lifelong patterns, of unanswered questions hardening into emotional architecture. As Erika aged, success failed to quiet the unease. The past did not stay behind. It waited patiently, growing heavier with time. And when the reckoning finally came, it did not offer clarity, only complexity. What happens when the narrative you live by no longer explains who you are? And when the truth finally asks to be seen, is revelation a form of freedom or another kind of loss? The fracture does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, in the late hours of an ordinary evening, when the rooms around Erika Kirk feel larger than they should and time moves with a heavy, deliberate patience. The lighting is soft, almost apologetic, casting long shadows that linger on walls filled with objects chosen long ago. These spaces once symbolized safety, evidence of stability earned through discipline and restraint. Now they feel like witnesses. They have seen too much stillness. Erika sits alone, her posture composed out of habit rather than intention. The world knows her as someone who endured, someone who mastered the art of forward motion without noise. But endurance, she has begun to understand, is not the same as resolution. The questions arrive without drama, without permission. They surface the way memory sometimes does, uninvited, precise, impossible to dismiss. Why does quiet now feel heavier than chaos ever did? Why do certain memories return with sharper edges instead of fading with age? The disruption is internal, almost invisible. No headlines shift. No relationships explode. Yet her emotional responses no longer align with the present moment. A passing comment lands too deeply. A familiar sound unsettles her. There are pauses where certainty used to live. She notices herself hesitating before small decisions, as though something unseen is asking to be acknowledged first. The realization unsettles her more than fear ever did. Silence has not been passive. It has been work. For decades, she labored to maintain control, to keep the past carefully contained. Silence was not emptiness. It was structure. It required vigilance, emotional regulation, constant recalibration. Success rewarded this discipline, offering insulation from inquiry. Achievement became proof that the system worked. Yet now, time has loosened the seams. Memory resurfaces not as narrative, but as sensation, tightness in the chest, a sudden fatigue, an ache without language. The psychological conflict deepens as Erika recognizes the cost. Survival without understanding has preserved her life, but not fully inhabited it. She has lived efficiently, responsibly, admirably. But admiration has never touched the places that feel most tender now. The story she has told herself, of resilience, of moving on, no longer accounts for the weight she carries in quiet moments. The narrative feels incomplete, and incompletion, she realizes, is exhausting. Foreshadowing appears in the smallest fractures. She avoids certain thoughts instinctively, then wonders why. She feels an urge to ask questions she has trained herself not to form. There is fear here, not of what she might find, but of what inquiry might dismantle. If she begins to look closely, what remains intact? Which versions of herself were built to survive rather than to be known? The chapter does not end with answers. It ends with suspension. Erika stands at the threshold of inquiry, aware that the moment she allows the questions to take shape, the life she understands, carefully constructed, fiercely protected, may no longer hold. Silence has failed her at last. And beyond it waits something far more complicated than truth. The past unfolds slowly, like a film reel flickering through dimly lit rooms, the edges of memory soft and uneven. For Erika Kirk, childhood was not defined by one moment of trauma, but by an intricate choreography of restraint, repetition, and quiet observation. The settings are modest and ordinary. Family living rooms with muted colors, playgrounds under watchful eyes, dinner tables where words could cut deeper than actions. In these spaces, expression was not neutral, it was weighted with consequence. A smile, a question, a protest could ripple through the household and leave reverberations long after the sound faded. From the earliest age, Erika learned the rules: when to speak, when to remain silent, how to gauge the moods of adults with precision that felt unnatural for a child. Observation became a form of survival, a protective skill that quietly taught her control before vulnerability. Fear existed constantly, though it had no name. An almost imperceptible tightness in her chest whenever a tone shifted or a glance lingered too long. Yet in this fear, intelligence took root. The ability to navigate emotional terrain before it could erupt, to anticipate consequences before they materialized. Formative disappointments were subtle yet persistent. Praise was inconsistent, affection conditional. Small betrayals, forgotten promises, dismissive words, unacknowledged effort, stacked invisibly, layering an emotional ledger she carried silently. There were lessons in invisibility, to be reliable, competent, and unremarkable in ways that made her indispensable yet never fully seen. Resilience grew alongside caution, and competence gradually replaced connection as the measure of worth. The emotional cost of these early strategies was hidden. Young Erika adapted, excelled, and learned to perform emotional labor she could barely name. She did not dream of public recognition or future achievement. Her imagination was occupied with distance from instability, the quiet hope of safety, and the preservation of herself within the limits imposed upon her. Foreshadowing threads subtly through these years. Traits that ensured her survival: vigilance, composure, controlled expression, are seeds for the loneliness she will later experience. The skills that kept her safe will later make her unknowable, even to herself. In quiet moments, long before the world asks for answers, Erika begins to understand that protection comes at the cost of intimacy. The chapter closes not with revelation, but with anticipation. The child who mastered silence is growing, carrying tools that will shape every success and every fracture to come, unaware that the very armor that shields her will one day isolate her most profoundly. Opportunity arrives like a sunrise that illuminates everything except what is beneath the surface. For Erika Kirk, early success does not arrive as joy, nor as a reward for aspiration. It comes as confirmation that survival works. The settings expand: brightened offices, crowded reception halls, stages where applause measures achievement but cannot touch the heart. She is surrounded by people who admire her, who celebrate her efficiency and resilience. Yet her private world remains tightly governed, locked behind carefully constructed doors. Emotionally, the contradiction is acute. Outwardly, Erika is opening into new possibilities, traveling paths she never imagined as a child. Yet inwardly, every step is measured, every gesture rehearsed. Achievement delivers relief, proof that her methods worked, but it does not deliver intimacy. The applause is hollow because it echoes in spaces where genuine recognition has never entered. The tension between external validation and inner quiet grows heavier with every accolade. Psychologically, this chapter is a study in reinforcement. Recognition teaches that silence has value, that withholding questions and guarding vulnerability produces tangible reward. The more her life expands, the less incentive exists to confront the shadows of her past. And yet, loneliness sharpens in proportion to visibility. Relationships are navigated with precision, friendships are tested, alliances measured, and emotional access granted only in calculated increments. Fear remains unspoken, a quiet companion that lingers even in the warmth of praise. Key events punctuate the rise with cinematic clarity. Career milestones unfold. Her work receives accolades. Her name appears in the press. Invitations arrive that once would have been inconceivable. Yet in hotel rooms and rented apartments, she experiences the isolation that achievement cannot erase. Even success cannot fill the hollow corridors of silence she has cultivated. These private moments, though invisible to the world, weigh more heavily than any public recognition ever could. Foreshadowing emerges in exhaustion that replaces exhilaration. Tasks that once inspired energy now feel burdensome. Each performance demands precision, not presence. Erika begins to sense that the version of herself being rewarded, efficient, composed, unflinching, is incomplete, that some essential part has been left behind. Yet halting is perilous. The world rewards momentum, and stopping feels like risking collapse. Success becomes both shield and trap, protection from scrutiny, but barrier to the self she cannot yet face. The chapter closes at the apex of professional achievement. She has arrived, visibly and materially, at a peak that once would have seemed unimaginable. And yet, beneath the polished exterior, a quiet alarm persists. Something essential remains unretrieved, a part of herself left behind in the rooms of childhood and the silence of years. And she wonders, if she reaches for it now, will everything she has built crumble? The apex of recognition is a stage both dazzling and oppressive. Erika Kirk moves through it like a performer whose mastery of timing has been honed over decades, yet whose script was never written for the private theater of the heart. The settings expand into spaces of contradiction. Bustling offices where decisions are made in milliseconds, conference rooms thick with expectation, events glittering with celebration, but always threaded with a quiet isolation no applause can reach. Every room hums with pressure. Every corridor carries the weight of consistency she has maintained at the cost of herself. The past, long buried under layers of discipline and achievement, begins to intrude in ways subtle yet insistent. Psychologically, the intrusions are relentless. Suppressed memories emerge not as vivid scenes, but as sensations, tremors in her chest, an unnameable tension behind the eyes, the lingering echo of voices once silenced. Questions she has avoided for decades demand presence, destabilizing a carefully balanced life built on efficiency and control. Composure, once second nature, begins to falter in quiet moments. A fleeting glance in the mirror reveals more than age. It exposes accumulation, the weight of avoidance, the residue of emotions left unspoken. Key events unfold across both public and private spheres, though their significance is internal. Erika withdraws emotionally from colleagues and collaborators. Her response is clipped, her smiles measured. Moments where composure nearly fails are brief. A tremor of the hand, a pause too long, a sigh that speaks volumes, but enough to signal cracks in the facade. The fear that once centered on survival now shifts into a more penetrating form: exposure. Not merely the danger of being seen, but the terror of being understood, fully and without control. Guilt emerges in tandem, but not for actions taken. Instead, it is guilt for what she never allowed herself to feel, for the tenderness she withheld from herself and others, for the silences that were protective yet corrosive. Foreshadowing intensifies as internal tension mounts. Each success, each accolade, now feels like a weight pressing against unresolved questions. The very tools that brought her safety, discipline, emotional control, strategic silence, become barriers to self-understanding. The realization arrives slowly, painfully. External achievement cannot resolve what has never been addressed internally. The life she built to protect herself can no longer shield her from the accumulation of years unexamined. The cost of continuing as she has becomes heavier than the risk of confronting truth. Scenes shift seamlessly between boardrooms, private hotel rooms, and silent hallways. Erika's inner monologue, though unspoken, reverberates. How much longer can I maintain this? If I look too closely, will it all collapse? Am I prepared to confront what I have avoided my entire life? The tension is cinematic, the heartbeat in empty spaces, the long pause before words form, the brush of memory across the consciousness like a cold wind. The chapter closes in suspended uncertainty. Erika stands at a crossroads she has evaded for decades. One path promises intact survival, the continuance of a carefully constructed life, unexamined and orderly. The other invites unraveling, a plunge into understanding that may threaten everything she has built. Silence has failed once, and now the consequences demand a choice she cannot postpone. The room is still, the night quiet, yet beneath the surface, the past waits patiently for acknowledgement. The question lingers: will she dare to face it? The air is different here. Quiet, deliberate, almost sacred. Erika Kirk moves through spaces that once seemed ordinary. Her home, now stripped of the distractions of daily achievement. The room silent except for the faint hum of distant life outside. Here, the past and present converge. Shadows from long-avoided memories pool in corners, and light falls with a patient weight, illuminating the subtle textures of her environment. The worn edges of a chair, a stack of notebooks unopened for years, the muted reflections in a polished table. Every object is a witness, a reminder that the life she has lived cannot be disentangled from the life she has avoided acknowledging. Emotionally, Erika is unguarded in ways she has never permitted herself before. She does not seek redemption. There is no need to justify or erase the choices that built her resilience. Instead, she faces integration, the reconciliation of survival and self, the acceptance that her story is neither perfect nor complete, yet entirely hers. Fear, once a shadow that dictated her every move, surfaces fully and without apology. She feels it not as a threat, but as a signal of life, of emotional territory finally engaged. Grief follows close behind. Grief for moments she deferred, for connections left untested, for tenderness she never claimed. It is not dramatic, but persistent, echoing in quiet sighs and long pauses, filling the gaps between thought and reflection. Key events unfold not as spectacle, but as subtle yet profound moments of internal reckoning. Erika allows herself to acknowledge the vulnerability she spent decades suppressing, to feel the weight of what she protected herself from without judgment. She sits with contradictions, pride and regret, clarity and confusion, love withheld and love received. Rebirth, in this context, is not reinvention but permission to hold strength and fragility together, to let resilience coexist with tenderness. Purpose shifts from the narrow aim of endurance to the broader pursuit of understanding herself and her past, to give meaning not just to what she accomplished, but to what she truly experienced. Legacy, too, is reframed. It is not measured in recognition, applause, or external markers of success. It is measured in emotional truth, in the willingness to allow a story to remain complex, unresolved, and human. Erika's narrative enters its most complicated chapter not because answers arrive, but because questions are finally allowed to breathe, to exist alongside the life she continues to live. The very act of confronting what was silenced reshapes the terrain of her identity, leaving her with clarity intertwined with ambiguity. The chapter closes in lingering reflection. Erika sits alone, observing the spaces that once contained only discipline and silence, now alive with acknowledgement. She has faced the shadows, integrated them into the present, and embraced the simultaneous coexistence of strength and vulnerability. And yet, the story is not complete. Questions remain, echoes of what was deferred, the persistent pulse of the unknown. The room is quiet, but her mind is awake, aware that the journey toward understanding will continue, quietly and insistently, long after the lights fade.